that are completely different to each other. And it is the opposite of anything to do with religiosity. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tipu and I make bookish content here on YouTube. And for today's video, we're going to be doing a reading vlog. And as you can tell from the title, today I'm going to be reading books that are completely different to each other. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm part of a book club, and the pick for this month was a book that is more religious, at least it seems that way, and that's definitely a genre of fiction that I don't usually read, so it's 100% out of my comfort zone. But I'm the type of person that will never say never when it comes to reading. I will read something even if I don't enjoy it. At least I have opened up my perspective in terms of what I have experienced. And the other book I had previously picked up, and it is the opposite of anything to do with religiosity. So I thought it'd be really fun to compare these two books that are seemingly on different sides of the spectrum and seeing which one I favor more and why that is. The first book that I'm going to be sharing is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And I don't really know that much about this book. The main thing that I do know is that it is a book about a hedonistic society where all rules are lost and people are gluttons to televisions and things like that, but kind of like the opposite of pious-natured people. So that's pretty much all that I know about this book, and that it's a dystopian novel. The next book that I'm going to be sharing is The Lost Sin Eaters by Francine Rivers. I had never heard of Francine Rivers ever in my life, and apparently she's a really big Christian author, so this is the first book that I've ever read from her. And I know that this book is kind of based on Scottish myth or lore about like the eating of sin, in terms of like once a person has died, sin eaters come to feast on their sin that they have left with their physical bodies. That's pretty much all I know about that book. So I'm feeling super excited for this challenge. I genuinely want to go into this without any bias and truly find which book on either side of the spectrum I enjoy more as a reader. And since I don't know much about either of the books, I thought it'd be cool if I just read the blurb from each of them. So starting with Brave New World, it says, far in the future, the world controllers have created the ideal society through clever use of genetic engineering, brainwashing, and recreational and drugs. All its members are happy consumers. Bernard Marx seems alone in harboring an ill-defined longing to break free. A visit to one of the few remaining savage reservations where the old imperfect life still continues may be the cure for his distress. Huxley's ingenious fantasy of the future sheds a blazing light on the present and is considered to be his most enduring masterpiece. It sounds really cool, like using gluttony and distraction in order to control people. I feel like I don't want to be like a doomerist, but in the age of AI, it is incredibly pertinent still. And the blurb for The Lost Sin Eater, all that matters for Caddy Forbes is finding the one man who can set her free from the sin that plagues her days and nights, the sin that has stolen her mother's love from her and made her wish she could flee life and its terrible justice. She knows it's forbidden, that doing so will bring curses down on her, but something deep and instinctive moves her against all dire warnings to find the Sin Eater. Before their journeys are over, Caddy and the Sin Eater must face themselves, to each other, and the one who will demand all from them in exchange for the answers they seek. It seems a bit more vague as to like what her sin is, and why is it plaguing her. I guess that is a bit interesting, but we'll see how that one goes. So now that we've gotten a bit of an intro into both of these books, I think right now I want to go and read the first chapter of each of these books so that I can figure out which one I want to read first. I feel like the blurb wasn't enough to choose, and I'm still interested in figuring out what Caddy's sin is, and I'll come back with my initial thoughts and decision on which one I'm going to start with.
Think about you every now and then, searching for any trace of your scent. We always saw it differently.
It is the next evening and I am back to share my initial thoughts on the 2 books that I read. So just for a recap, I just read the first chapter of these 2 books. So Brave New World had a whole bunch of introductions and like an author biography and also a prologue. I just read the prologue for Brave New World, and then also for this book I read the first chapter, and I'm going to start by talking about The Lost Sin Eaters. I will start out by saying that I was pleasantly surprised by the book. The writing is actually good and it reminds me of Outlander, the way that they speak. I think they're also Scottish. Yeah, so they're Scottish, so it's like so much like how the phrases speak, which is really nice and sort of familiar to me, so I'm enjoying that so far. And as for the setting, we are in America, in this mountainous area where our main character Caddy's family had settled after violence and hardships in Scotland led her grandparents to America in search for a new life, and they settled on this mountain and they've kind of built it up with other families, good and bad, in order to build a life for themselves in this new country. The one thing that I'll say so far is that there is a bit of repetition with the idea of like trying to get us as readers to be interested in the tension or the plot of the story. So she's kind of alluding quite frequently to this sin that Caddy has committed, and not in a way of like resolving it, but in a sort of way to create interest in the point. But it's kind of like constantly being repeated that Caddy is so ashamed of this terrible thing that she's done, and her mother doesn't even look at her, and she's carrying this burden with her, but we haven't really found out what that is, but it's just constantly being brought up, which I find it a bit frustrating. I feel like there's better ways to get us to care about her sin without it being so repetitive. So far I feel like this is giving a very like folk story. If you like things like Outlander and East of Eden, I don't know, if you like sort of forging new countries, building communities, that's kind of the vibe it's giving so far. So far I appreciate the link to the nature and the little cultural things like shaving a deceased person's head and wearing that braid, a nod towards what was done in the past. Learning things like that, that's very interesting for me. And I think in terms of plot points, we're probably gonna find out more about what Caddy is going to experience with this sin eater, because she kind of did something she wasn't supposed to in the presence of a sin eater. So I think that's where the story's gonna go, just unraveling her own sin. She's gonna also like try to get to know and understand sin eaters and why they do what they do. I think it's gonna maybe follow like both Caddy and the Sin Eater being set free from their sin. The way that they described Sin Eaters in the book was a person or an entity that wanders around in the forest and goes to recently deceased people to absorb their sin so they can move on to heaven in peace. So far I think it's good. There are still things like I'm kind of saddened that Caddy is such a young child, but she's so burdened by sin. That's not really fun. And now for Brave New World. And for Brave New World, as I mentioned earlier, I just read the prologue, so I didn't really get very far with it, but I enjoyed what I've read so far. I think it was just like giving an introduction to his mindset and reasoning for writing this book. He wrote the prologue like 15 years after it had been published, so just kind of reflectively looking back on the book and saying like what he thinks will come in the future. But honestly, from the prologue alone, I just really like the way that he writes. It's very intellectual and that just interests me. A lot of things about bottled babies have been mentioned, so I feel like that's where we're going to be going. Babies in bottles and creating sort of like the servitude class, people who are happy to serve and who are bred to serve, a world which is placating those people through not exactly drugs or alcohol, because those are too debilitating, but other means like television or other distractions in order to get them to be happy with their position. And he mentioned something about square pegs in round holes, like people need to be segregated according to what class of thinkers or doers they are. So far getting a sense of like, obviously themes of a dystopian world, controlling of the people, tyranny, he mentioned that a lot, and utopia, but also he mentioned like people who live in utopia versus people who are like primitive but are happy. But then he also optioned something new, which is not part of the book, but which in his reflection he said that he would offer another one, which is people who are sane. And so far the narration is just impeccable. It's scientific, but it's also thoughtful, and it's really up my alley. It's not simplistic at all, and it requires critical thinking as well. Those are the type of books that I like to read. So just for an example, and in an age of advanced technology, inefficiency is the sin against the Holy Ghost. A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. So things like that, just really fun concepts written in a fun and interesting way. So given those two introductions, I think I'm going to start off with The Last Sin Eater first. It is a longer book, and I'll get started on that.
No goodbye text, we parted our ways. Think about you every now and then.
So it is 2 days later now. I'm now 50% through with The Lost Sin Eater, and so far I'd say that the book is not 100% predictable. There are definitely some things that have happened with which I didn't expect, characters showing up which I didn't expect, so I guess in that sense I have been a bit surprised. And I feel like in terms of where the book is going now that we're at the 50% mark, I feel like I know where it's gonna go. I feel like it's pretty obvious the route we're gonna take from here on out. So I think the rest of the book might be pretty predictable. So far my feelings on the book is that it's not really my cup of tea. And I think it's just like a fundamental difference between what the characters go through and how they react to the situations that they're in, and how they're supposed to, according to the book, process that trauma and view it. I kind of see that all differently to the author. I see it more of like a trauma thing that they probably have to heal from, and the characters are seeing it more as like a sin that they have to carry as a burden. That's fundamental difference, and it does make reading the book hard because the author is constantly using the image of sin on the main character as like a point to draw us in, and I genuinely feel like a 10-year-old girl should not be burdened as much as she is. So that makes it harder for me to agree with the book. And speaking of the main character, Caddy, so far we have seen her sort of go through a transformation from being burdened to something a bit more aligning with the Christian transformation that is usually present. And I think I don't really have an issue with her getting saved or anything like that. It just felt very night and day. It didn't really feel like a journey, and then she like wakes up the next day and she's happier and lighter, and her like, you know, she's almost a different person, people are saying. So it is hard to like enjoy that sort of quick transformation. I would have preferred if it was a bit more gradual. That's just the type of journey that I prefer to see, even within a religious context. And you know, like all of a sudden she kind of fits very perfectly into religious practices that I'm assuming she hasn't had access to. So that's another part that's like, how does she know that she needs to do this and she needs to do that? It is a bit of a question for me. And the writing style is pretty simple, I'd say. I mean, you do get a bit of the atmosphere of the mountain and the forest and the flowers and the weather and the topography. So you do get the feeling of being in a forest, which I appreciate. She does talk a lot about the sun and the rain and the moon, which adds atmosphere to the book. She's quite heavy-handed with her messaging and her meaning. She doesn't really give us as readers the space to figure things out. She kind of just plops it into your lap, which makes it feel like this book is maybe for younger audiences that need that help when explaining connections and themes and things like that. and motivations of characters and tying together moments. So if I can say that there are a few moments that I am enjoying amidst all of my other issues, I think probably her relationship with Miss Alda, her relationship with Fagin. I like those two relationships and I find I'm very interested in reading about them. Also just small things like learning about the food they're eating and the wreaths that they make and that they catch squirrels and fish and like more just like around the lifestyle that they live. I think this book is set around like the year 1850, so just kind of the lifestyle that they lived. That's super interesting and enjoyable. I'm currently at the point where Caddy essentially has overcome or dealt with her own personal burdens, and now she's kind of faced with the idea of helping her community. So I think that's where the rest of the book is going to go. Caddy and Fagin working together with other individuals to proselytize to their community. And one thing I can say for now is like I definitely wouldn't have heard of this book outside of book club. It's 100% outside of my comfort zone, and I do like to say never to reading something, but sometimes when you read books that are very different from your own fundamental beliefs, it can kind of like strengthen the beliefs that you have. And in terms of like the religious aspect of this book, that's kind of been the result. It's just making me think more deeply in terms of my own beliefs without devaluing what's in the book, but just understanding that I don't really think the same way as she does. So it's pretty late now, so I'm gonna go to sleep, but tomorrow we're gonna continue on with this book.
Been spacing all day. I'll make my case. What future we could have changed. Looking back.
I just don't like how she belittles herself so much. She doesn't even believe her father would think well of her, and she's like blaming herself to the end. I'm not done yet, but it's not the end that I'd want to see for her. You'd hope that she would forgive herself in some ways and be kinder to herself, but she really isn't, unfortunately.
Looking back at all that's true.
So it is me a little bit later, and I have officially finished the last of the Sin Eaters, and I would say that I feel disappointed. I'm not going to say that I had a lot of expectations for this book because I knew that from the jump it's not something that I would pick up on my own, but I definitely didn't want to have any biases against the book. But even without at least trying to not have any biases, it still just didn't land for me. Just a couple of things and choices and the writing style. So overall I just feel like even though I knew I wasn't going to be particularly happy with the subject matter, there were also things on top of that which were not that great. So my final rating for the novel is 2 stars. I feel like I was being kind of generous. There were points where I felt it was closer to a 1 star instead of 2 stars, but I landed on 2 stars for a couple of reasons. We basically follow Caddy, and she kind of goes on this quest to find a way to deal with her own sins, and along that journey different things come up, and it slowly becomes apparent that the story that Caddy has been told about the village is not the true story on multiple levels. Like there are a couple of storylines that we follow, like Caddy and her dealing with her sin, also an elderly woman in the community, various people who are outcasts in the community, and then we also follow a character who kind of symbolizes the devil within the community. And in terms of the actual writing style, there were some moments that were very dialogue heavy, which I kind of just wanted to finish the book, so it helped, I guess, but she doesn't really give us the space to think about things for ourselves. Very heavy-handed, and I didn't like that. It's almost as if she knows the message that she wants you to take away from the book, and you're kind of not given any space to infer any sort of personal meaning from the novel. It's a bit restrictive. Reading the book, there is a lot of Scottish lingo and like dialect and also just cultural things. For me, that was nice to read. And I think it's obvious that I'm not the intended audience for this book, but even though I'm not who this book is intended for, I still read it, so I feel like I can have some sort of an opinion on it. If you are someone that maybe isn't super religious, maybe this book might not be for you, but also like if you want to read it 100%, you should read it. As someone who has kind of already in some ways moved away from that sort of belief system, it wasn't really nice to be reading long paragraphs of things that I don't believe in anymore. So that wasn't the best for me, but obviously I was, again, like, because I am not the intended audience. But outside of that, I think the book did have potential, like off of the tradition that it was based off of, but I feel like there were just certain things that made it, one, unbelievable, and two, very unenjoyable to read for me. There's also a tiny bit of a romance subplot, but not outright, because she is like a 10-year-old girl, but towards the end we do get more information on that, so it's not like a huge romantic thing. It's just kind of like appropriate for a 10-year-old, simmering feelings. In terms of the ending, I felt like the ending was fine, believable. It was actually a lot more moderate than I thought it would be. I thought they were gonna get like a miraculous thing, but I feel like the way that the ending was portrayed was a lot more believable, which I wasn't expecting, because a lot of what has happened in the book has been so unbelievable. So the ending was just okay for me, and I feel like the author Francine was trying to convey religious themes, but mostly around like salvation. And I feel like if I could give like a 2-sentence summary of what I think she was trying to get across, was just that believe in Jesus and your sins will be forgiven. That was just very much hammered into us. There was no beauty or nuance or anything that was put to that. It was kind of just like very black and white. Really wasn't approached with any sort of curiosity or anything. It was just like put there as fact, and then everybody just took it easily. As I mentioned earlier, this book had a lot of moments where secrets were revealed to us that were held inside of the community. So there were some moments where Francine Rivers was trying to create anticipation, tension, suspense, and I felt like the way that she went about doing that was a bit difficult to read. She would kind of just mention the same thing over and over and over again without ever like giving enough context to the situation. So it's just like you're being reminded that you don't know something over and over and over again, but you're not being told enough to even try to put it together for yourself, which is just incredibly frustrating. For an example, Caddy had a sin, and multiple times in probably every single chapter up until the point when it was revealed, which was halfway through the book, Caddy would be mentioning that she had a sin, and we just didn't know what that was, but it was brought up so much that it became frustrating to hear about this thing. And in some ways I can say that I feel like I connected to Caddy. It's just not fun growing up in any sort of situation where you're unsure about your place and whether or not you're loved as a child, and that really struck me as something that was painful and I could relate to. But instead of viewing it as in a religious context, I kind of viewed it from more like a trauma way, which is completely different, because I feel like in a religious context it's almost like you get washed of your sins and you're free, and that's kind of it. From my own personal point of view, it would be more like trauma, something that has the possibility to show up in other areas of your life and can follow you for a very, very long time. And I just felt like there were just a few moments in the book that were a bit unexplainable, or just moving a little bit too much beyond belief. Like things like never hearing about, say, Jesus, and then immediately like being able to act in a way which is a product of cultural upbringing and experience after, say, 2 days. It was things like that. Now I'm going to be moving on to a spoiler section, and I'm just going to be talking unfiltered about the book. So if you don't want any spoilers, then just skip this section. So I mentioned it earlier about trauma, but I just feel like Caddy was just very harsh on herself, even though towards the end she was like delivered from her sins. I feel like to the extent that she was extremely hateful of herself, it was not really resolved in a good enough way for me. And this happens constantly in the book, where Caddy's just saying things like Granny, she seemed to love me without cause, and though I knew in my heart I was undeserving. It's just multiple instances where Caddy is just berating herself And I didn't like to read that, especially because she's a young girl. I just did not like reading about how little she felt of herself. I also found the scenes with the prophet very hard to read. I think he was just like very long-winded and just reading paragraph upon paragraph of like things that maybe you've heard of before, or it was kind of not the funnest part to read his monologue that he had. And there were a couple like things that were left unresolved, like Miss Aldous' children. We didn't really find out why they left the mountain. We know that obviously Iona is her daughter, but she had other children who had left after Sim became the Sin Eater, so that wasn't explained why they left. I guess it's not that important, but just something that I'm thinking about. And then another thing which we didn't get 100% explanation on was Libet. I know at the end it was mentioned that it could have been her sister coming towards her as a guiding spirit. Yeah, I just wish that there was a bit more given into where she came from and why she was there. I just feel like it was just very convenient to add a certain character to just always conveniently guide her to do the right thing, instead of like building that into the story, just like making an imaginary character who just conveniently disappears as the story dies down. And another thing which I felt like wasn't fully resolved was the situation with Caddy's mother. I don't know, I just felt like I didn't believe the last moment they had together where she revealed that she felt like she should have fallen off. Like obviously her sister has been gone for maybe a few years now, so it didn't feel like it fit with how we saw her mother acting early in the book. Towards the end, there was a subplot of the violence against Native American people that the original settlers took when they arrived on the mountain, and I just felt like that entire subplot came out of nowhere and it just existed to explain their sins. It wasn't really dealt with in a good-hearted way of actually telling the story of the Native American people. It was just like we needed to scramble and explain away more reasons why they all have sin and why everyone living in that mountain has something over their heads, the reasoning why they would all want a Sin Eater. But I felt like it was just not unnecessary, but it just came out of the blue and it didn't really serve much of a purpose outside of a very selfish one. Considering the seriousness of the nature, it wasn't dealt with as much seriousness as other topics in the book. Obviously, we witnessed multiple people in the community choosing to be saved. I think I had an issue with how easy it was. And I'm not saying that it should be difficult, but it just was like everyone believed everything, and once you heard it from one person, you were emulating that, in my opinion, like cultural representation within days, within hours. I couldn't believe that they just like were believing it so quickly. But like I said earlier, I thought the ending was pretty okay. I feel like it was good that she mentioned that not everyone chose to be saved. I feel like that's a lot more realistic. The book really didn't move me. I feel like the only time I felt any sort of emotion, which was like interest, was when Brogan Kai was going up the mountain, Dead Man's Mountain, looking for Caddy and Fagin. That was probably the most interesting moment in the entire book. And that's it for spoilers. I don't have to mention it again, but this book just wasn't for me. And like I said earlier, I'm sticking with 2 stars for how I felt. 2 stars is generous. So now we're going to be moving on to this book, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I would say that I'm hoping for intellectual discourse, something that actually gives me the room to think and gives me the space to grapple with issues on my own, instead of like heavy-handedly explaining every single detail. I'm not sure what it will be like, but I'm hoping that it will be interesting at the very least. So we're gonna get on with that.
Denial. I always spoke well of you. I hope you know. I've been spaces.
So it is the next day and I am up to about halfway through with the book. I'm super intrigued to see where the storyline goes. So far, I feel like I love the system that Aldous Huxley has put forth in this world. It definitely is a moral question, and instead of like it being, obviously it is bad, but it's not like, it's more of like a discussion. It's not aggressively evil, but it's like the small things that pop up, and you kind of left to put together the pieces and to decide for yourself whether or not the way that they're living is bad or how much it contradicts the world that we live in today. And I would say like they're just a couple of elements of like the world that are like very emblematic of showing the extent to which class is entrenched in that society. It makes me think about how it might not be as obvious of an example in our world, but those same differences of class exist today as well. So things like betas and alphas only traveling by helicopters, and that's like a privilege that they have, and the idea of walking on the ground is just like so lowly to them. Things like that just exist in different places in the novel, and I really like how this book is written. It's super easy to get through. The writing, the language isn't too difficult, and I feel like the characters are enjoyable to read about, and so far that the story has been gripping and interesting. I'm enjoying where the story is going, and I feel like the characters are selfish in their own ways, but they also, each of them are representing the product of the society that they live in. And I think it's just interesting how he introduces a character who is a black sheep in many ways, but he's not really seeking answers or seeking more from the society because of any sort of moral conviction, just because he doesn't fully fit into what the society prescribes. That's his reasoning for delving deeper, which is kind of, it's a selfish exploration in my opinion. But I love that we have that character. The more dystopian books I read, the more I'm like, they honestly can't do wrong. I don't know why I love dystopian books so well, but I think it's because they look at the culture that we're living in and they imagine a world where our worst elements are exaggerated to the point of destruction. And I like the critical commentary that is embedded in a lot of dystopian books. So I've read a couple this year and they're all pretty amazing. And right now I feel like we're getting very much into what the main conflict of the novel is going to be. I guess as for like a quick little introduction and explanation of what I've read so far, we were basically dropped into this world and explained kind of how the system works, and then we were introduced to a couple of characters who, male and female, are serving different purposes. And in this world there are two types of people: the people that follow the rules of the society, and there's also the savages. And the people that are like in power sort of contain the savages in a reservation area, so people that are part of the societal structure can go and visit the savages. So we're kind of around that spot, and I'm enjoying it so much. It's honestly been such a breeze to read.
He laid flat on the fields.
So I finished Brave New World. I was so deeply immersed into this novel. I just wanted to continue reading chapter after chapter after chapter. This book is like nothing that I've ever read before, and I really liked how we were learning more and more about the world as it went on. Like there were even some elements about the world that we found out close to the last chapter of the novel, and I have to say this was such a great read. I gave it 5 stars, and in this novel we follow a few characters, but towards the end, in the second half, we're mostly following James. And what I like about the character James is that he sort of represents a challenge to the world that they have created. And even though things seem perfect and the people seem happy, James exists in order to call into question whether the people are actually fully satisfied and whether they are living meaningful lives. And throughout the novel, we witness his character development, and he goes from idolizing the idea of civilization to, once being confronted with that truth, changing in his own belief system and sort of growing even more deeply into the coping mechanisms that he had while he was still living in the reservation. I found Aldous Huxley's writing incredibly digestible but still quite immersive. Like, I enjoyed the book a lot, and there were so many amazing moments of moral dilemmas placed towards us, but it was written in such a digestible way. Even the moments that were focused solely on plot were incredibly easy to read, but still incredibly satisfying. And I felt like the ending of the book was quite fitting. It just felt like a very fitting culmination of all of the events that we had been witnessing, especially in that last chapter. I don't think that in terms of the future of the world, it's that open-ended. I think that it kind of suggests that things may just continue as they are, and the ending kind of brings on this enduring sense of hopelessness for the people living in that civilization. This is my first Aldous Huxley book, and I will definitely be picking up other books of his. I know that there is a Brave New World Revisited and also another novel of his that is called The Island, which was written later in his life and reflecting more of his ideas in a more concise way. Obviously, the goal of this video is to compare and contrast the two novels that I read, but I definitely feel like I like this book a lot more, and I'm not sure if it's because I didn't like that other book as much. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I just like this book on its own merit a lot more. So now I'm going to talk about a few spoilers in Brave New World. And one thing that I genuinely loved was the moment of happiness and love that was shared between the three men before Helmholtz and Bernard were exiled. It showed that they were capable of emotion even with their conditioning, and that they were now turning over to a life of science and intellectualism, that, you know, maybe through the acceptance of understanding that there is more to this world, even if they don't get to share that with the greater society, and they'll have to live on the outskirts of society with other recluses, they were still able to appreciate that, to kind of like override their conditioning, especially for Bernard, because he's someone that consistently throughout the book we saw time and time again fight with that idea of wanting to explore more but still being caught up in the glimmer and the beauty and the egoic pursuit of success and fame inside of the civilization. The fact that they were able to engage and share that emotion was just, it was a very hopeful moment, and it kind of makes you think that there are more people like Helmholtz and Bernard, and Mustafa is someone who is like them as well, but he has chosen to suppress that within him for the greater good of stability. And so the setting of the world is very much like similar to a world that we are used to. It's set in England, and kind of a lot of the things that are present, they're not really outside of the realm of belief in terms of helicopters and trains, that kind of division of classes where the alphas and betas ride in helicopters, whereas the gamma, deltas and epsilons ride in trains. Like when Bernard and Linnea were in the reservation and she was complaining about how she had to walk, like that was something that she never ever had to do. It's seen as a more lower caste activity. I think that element of like class stratification is very similar to what we experience in this society. And there was a moment when Mustafa spoke about the tip of an iceberg, where you have the portion that is visible over the water is only a fraction of what is submerged underneath, and that portion that is underneath is what keeps the iceberg, is the actual structure and backbone of the iceberg, but they are hidden and they're not viewed essentially, and that's kind of something that exists in the world that we live in today. So they also explore many themes of what is the meaning of being a human in this world. Are we supposed to fight and work hard and to struggle in order to achieve, or are we supposed to exist to belong to this greater purpose, foregoing our individualism in order to live for the civilization? The debate against individual fulfillment versus collective fulfillment and prosperity. And we witnessed that debate between Mustafa and John towards the end of the novel. And I liked how Aldous Huxley doesn't really impose any view on you. You're kind of left with the ability to pick your own side, and honestly I genuinely see reasons in both sides of both John and in Mustafa. But whereas John takes it so far to the point of actually whipping himself and desiring to cause himself pain in his pursuit of purity, like I feel like his view of the world, and I understand it's obviously a reaction to the insanely superficial world that they live in, but I feel like John had those elements of like purity and like kind of Shakespearean goodness in him from even when he was in the reservation. So even though I respect John's idea of individualism and like seeking God and seeking meaning, emotion, and beauty in the world, I also think that he kind of also takes it a bit too far. And I think I mentioned it earlier, I found the ending to be very fitting. It just showed that John could not survive in that society at all. He could not, even with his own convictions, he couldn't even exist as a member. Like, it took everything from him. And I think it's so interesting because we have the contradiction of that with his own mother, who ended up in the reservation, and she was able to survive all those years. I mean, she wasn't happy, and she didn't like that she was losing her conditioning and that she was becoming more and more like a savage, but she kind of was able to still survive in that way. But John could not do it, and I think that that's a great contrast and an amazing point, that we are not meant to be living in this hyper-industrialized society of dumbing ourselves down and constantly distracting ourselves. Like, it's very destructive and can only ever end in the way that John's life ended. Towards the end of the book, Aldous Huxley also spoke about the idea of being alone, and John, when he was in the reservation, he was constantly alone. Like, he was always alone, always by himself, and all that he sought was community. And once he got into the civilized world, that was all that they have, was community. You're not allowed to be alone. You're not allowed to think for yourselves. You're not allowed to be distracted at all. You need to constantly be doing something, consuming something, producing something. You need to constantly be distracted. And that too was not what John sought as well. So he was hoping for community, and once he got this very superficial and empty, meaningless version of community, which didn't allow him to exist as an individual, he went even deeper into himself as a result. And I think that there is, like, obviously it's not explicitly stated, but there is a racial element of this book. John, of course, is Caucasian, and in the book they kind of mention that in London they are in the business of bottling and decanting European babies. So I think like it's very much like implicit that this story existing on the same level could not have happened if John was not European. If he was, say, a Native American person, I don't think that they would have, not that they treated him with respect, but they would have been interested in trying to integrate him into this society, because already other savages exist, but they don't ever really try to bring them into society as a sort of social experiment. I think they just brought him in there to question how far their conditioning goes. Like, does it go down one level or two levels, or is it only like one generation of hypnopedic conditioned babies are going to carry those values with them? And I think that's the case in this example. So this novel is such a unique dystopian book. I've never read a dystopian novel like it, and I enjoyed it so much. I feel like I could talk about so many different elements in this book for such a long time. It was that critically challenging, morally challenging, and I enjoyed that so much. So now for my final thoughts on the entire video, comparing these two books. The Last of the Sin Eaters is definitely not my style. At first I was thinking it's because of the religious aspect, but Brave New World did have a tiny bit of religion and talk about religion towards the end, but I definitely enjoyed it more in this book because I feel like it was brought on from a more philosophic lens where you're actually using your brain. I found this book to be a lot more dogmatic, and that is 100% fine. There is somebody who wants to read books that are like this, but it's just not me, unfortunately. I didn't think that this book engaged me critically at all, and that probably wasn't the point of the novel, and I probably won't be reading a Francine Rivers book again, but you know, I'm someone who would read anything, so never say never. And Brave New World was amazing. It was stunning. It was more than I ever even expected. I enjoyed this book so much. This is definitely one of my favorite books that I've read this year. This book is almost 100 years old, and it genuinely feels like it was written yesterday, which is crazy. This book left me questioning so much, so many moral questions in this book, and Aldous Huxley doesn't spell it out for you. Like, you have to come to your own conclusion whether or not you think the feelies are bad or the babies in the bottles are bad. Like, you have to come to your own conclusion. He doesn't force anything on you. He just presents the world as it is, presents the challenges, and you come to your own conclusions, which I love. And that was it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and follow me on Fable and Goodreads. I will catch you in the next video. Bye.
We always start